quite a while since I've had the chance to talk about Charmwork, the fantasy book series I'm currently writing. If you haven't heard of it before, I've left a link to the playlist of videos I've made on it here, and in the description. They break down some of the main characters, the magic system and world, and my process in approaching this writing. For those of you who do know about it, I'll let you know that I am very close to finishing the full draft of my first book, after which will come the editing, revisions, and, in some form, publishing. I'll let you know more details about that as we get closer to the finish line. There are a few reasons Charmwork has taken me longer than Paws of Stars, my Power of Three and Omen of the Stars rewrite series, did to write. The first and biggest of these reasons being work. I moved to a new position soon after Paws of Stars ended, where I needed to cover a lot more responsibilities than I did in my previous teaching position, and it takes up a lot more of my time in and out of school. The second, though, is that I am much more concerned with making this a good story. I loved Paws of Stars very much, but I always knew that, as a rewriting of an existing story, my main goal was improving on something I had already been thinking about for years, and only creating original elements where they would fit. Charmwork is my baby, an original story that I am making specifically because I've never seen a story with the themes I am looking for before. Now that it is going to exist, I want to be sure that it is as good as I am capable of making it. And that does mean putting a lot more focus, energy, and time into idea generation, world building, phrasing, word choice, pacing, and theming than I did in Paws of Stars. I had an extensive outline and series Bible going in, but I add to it whenever I find a need as I'm writing the story, and I change elements of the chapter outlines to fit the pacing, character trajectories, or plot of a chapter. One of the things I've put the most focus into over the last few months is character relationships, and that is what we are here to talk about today. If you've seen my first video on Charmwork, you would recognize these characters: Lada, Manny, Spring, Elm, Foxtail, and Prevette. Together, these 6 make up the main cast of the first book, and the series as a whole. Lada and Manny are the lost cat and dog, separated from their humans and determined to find their way back. Spring is a shelter cat who was never adopted over her, now 5, years waiting for someone to choose her. Elm is a classical wild dweller stuck in the shelter as they were pulled from their happy life and family, and Foxtail and Prevette are a pair of secretive wild dweller siblings who, for whatever reason, seem to have chosen the city as a safe house as they run from something. On their own, I knew how I wanted all of their arcs to go, and generally how I wanted those arcs to interplay with the overall plot and themes of the series. That was certainly enough for me to be happy with the chapter outlines, but it was not enough when I started writing out each individual scene. I know, for example, the big turning points in the story where I need certain characters to already have specific relationships with each other. By the end of Book 1, 3 characters in particular need to have bonded deeply enough with each other and with the world they're in for you to understand why they make the choices they do, which is different from the choices they would have made at the beginning of the story. In order for that choice to make sense and have any weight, I needed to spend a lot of time in the background of previous chapters setting up, not just the choice itself and the characters adapting feelings on it, but the bond of the characters and how those change over the course of the book. And in order to do that, you're going to need dialogue, banter, reactions, or downtime. Places where you can show how the characters relate to each other, reveal how they may have related in the past, and give the reader a sense of how those relationships are changing. This is undoubtedly the piece I will be focusing the most of my revisions on when I start them, as I entered the writing process with a very different sense of how and when these characters would relate to each other than I have now. But it does mean that, as I near the end of the drafting phase, I can share with you some aspects of what I have come to know about these characters. I'm going to keep this a spoiler-light video, so I'm not revealing where these relationships will head, but I will say where they start, and perhaps allude to aspects that may change with time. First up is the dynamic duo that starts off the series as a whole, Lada and Manny. Lada had 2 years to herself when she was first adopted by her people, but Manny has only ever known a world with Lada in it. Manny is, thankfully, a much calmer and quieter dog than some are, but as a puppy, she still needed time to learn that Lada didn't have as much energy as she did, and predominantly chose to get out her own energy while on runs, hikes, swims, or otherwise with one of their humans. Lada and Manny care about each other deeply, and have gotten used to having each other in their lives, but their fragmented communication, differing perspectives, and the changing situations they find themselves in across the book cause each character to think about the nature of their relationship in a different way. Lada's perspective will obviously be much clearer since we can see her dialogue and, often, thoughts, but I've had a lot of fun playing with how to show Manny's perspective through her body language, seeming priorities, and a special dialogue setup of her own. Lada's determining what sort of relationship they have is going to be a large checkpoint on her character arc, and her perspective on Manny is often informed by how her personal mental state and sense of self is doing. Manny, meanwhile, is stalwart and fairly sure of her relationships from minute one. As much as the separation from her people is affecting her, she doesn't have to adjust as much to being outside or adventuring, having done it plenty with her people before. This probably gives her the most stability and clarity on herself and her desires of anyone in the cast when the story begins. Too bad most of our cast isn't privy to her perspective. Lada does have another key relationship that is much clearer to see, though, and that is with her childhood friend, Spring. Lada was brought into the foster system as a single orphaned kitten named Anemone by her foster human, while Spring was born into a litter of 4 to a house cat mother. So they didn't know each other right away, but they met when they were only 6 months old, and stayed in the shelter together until they were each a year old. That gave them a lot of chances to learn about each other and bond, to the point that they were each hoping to be adopted together. Of course, that didn't end up happening. Lada's new family only wanted 1 cat, and the shelter didn't consider them a bonded pair, so Lada was adopted and Spring was not. Ever, in fact. When they reunite in the present, a lot has changed about the two of them. Lada has all of her loyalty devoted to Manny and her people, and though she still cares for Spring, some amount of distance clearly formed. Spring, meanwhile, never got as close to anyone at the shelter as she had been with Lada, so she simultaneously wants to be close to Lada and to avoid intruding on her new relationships. These two understand each other so much and so little, basing their thoughts about each other on the cats they knew the other to be and their own assumptions about what the life of the other must have been like. They care very deeply for each other, but it's hard for either of them to realize or admit how much 4 years has changed them both. And it may be necessary for them to learn more about who they are now before they can truly be as close as they were when they were kittens. Of course, Lada meets new cats through the course of this book as well, the first of which being Elm. Elm's past experiences as a wild dweller got them very used to being polite with and helping cats on a temporary basis as they pass through. And that is mainly how they think of the cast at large. They consider themselves a mentor figure, helping these new cats who helped them get out of the shelter to make connections, learn the skills, and scout the territory they will be moving into. Lada is extremely grateful for the help, and polite enough herself that she doesn't realize how condescending they can sometimes be. They assume their way of life to be the choice that every cat would make, and consider it especially inevitable that Lada would choose to live apart from people once she discovers her Charmwork, healing, just as someone close to Elm uses. This assumption causes them to focus too much on teaching Lada, and Spring as well, to survive in the city, or the history of the wild, and to consider any attempts to find a new house to live in fruitless wastes of time. They try to be polite about it, and as a result, Lada tends to accept their aid and kindness at face value, but they definitely have some things to learn as well. One cat who does notice how they tend to treat Lada is Spring. Elm was brought into the shelter before Lada was, and Spring had the time to learn about them before any escape attempts were planned. What Spring learned was that Elm learned about her faster than she could analyze them, having a strong enough intuition to sense her reservations about the shelter before Spring ever voiced them. It was also plainly obvious to her how Elm considered the wild to be the best place for a cat to be, and demeaned both the shelter and houses as prisons where cats were locked away from their potential. Spring wasn't particularly enjoying spending her entire life in the shelter, so it's not as though she fully disagreed with Elm, but they crossed the line when they started trying to control Lada's choices. Clearly, Lada had been given a chance for a great life with the people and didn't want to give that up, and Spring probably wouldn't either if she was in Lada's position. Spring ends up standing up to Elm more often than not, wanting to learn from them but feeling prickly about what her own choices could reinforce in Elm's mind. And no matter what Elm thinks, they don't actually know everything about her or certainly Lada. After all, if nothing else, there's no way they could possibly be right about Lada's dedication to her. But let's move on from that for now, because there are, of course, 2 cats we have yet to mention. Foxtail and Prevette spend most of this book trying to keep as much emotional and personal distance from the rest of the cast as they can. As far as they're concerned, this is a matter of business, a favor for Elm. It's best not to leave hanging debts, after all. They're much younger than the rest of the cat cast, 2 years old next to Lada and Spring's 5 and Elm's 8, but they have more carefully trained skills in the wild, more knowledge of a variety of Charmwork types, and more connections around the city, where Elm doesn't see the point in getting close to many cats. This makes them an invaluable resource that Lada is grateful to have, but they're also pretty hard to get along with. Prevette oscillates between being submissive and haughty, but always keeps a sizable guard up. And Foxtail, well, anything and everything seems to annoy him. Neither of them have as strong a bias towards wild dwellers as Elm does, but Foxtail does make jabs at house cats as much as he does at everyone, which never fails to annoy Spring. However, once a few words are slipped out accidentally, and a chance encounter leaves the siblings in a panic, both Lada and Spring will have some chances to get a sense of what might have driven these two wild dwellers to become city folk in the first place. And once the secrets are a little more out in the open, these two may finally have a chance to forge some connections. There are really only 2 cats among our main cast that the siblings start the book trusting. The first is Elm. Foxtail and Prevette were born as wild dwellers, and were clearly raised there enough to develop skills and knowledge that only wild dwellers tend to know. However, for some reason, they moved to the city instead, recently, which is a difficult thing to do. Living in the city requires an entirely different skill set, network of connections, and set of priorities than living in the wild does. And by happenstance, Elm was the one to help them make that transition. The 2 siblings ran into Elm and their families shortly after leaving their previous home. And with little more explanation than the feelings the siblings were giving off, Elm figured out that they wanted, or needed, to get away, and stepped in without a second thought to help. They brought Foxtail and Prevette to the city and got them set up in a private park nook where they could stay out of sight of both humans and other cats when they needed to. Foxtail and Prevette trust them quite a lot after that, and Elm still considers them one of the projects under their care. The other cats Foxtail and Prevette trust are, of course, each other. They have a complicated relationship, but one thing that has always been clear is that they care for each other. Foxtail would step in an instant to protect Prevette from any threat, and Prevette trusts no one more than Foxtail to help her if she's going too far on something. Unlike many of my pairs of cast members, these 2 start out the story tied at the hip, and almost thought of as a unit by the other cast members. Even Manny and Lada aren't as close as they are, because of the 3-year age difference and communication difficulties. As a result, a lot of my plans for them going forward involve separating them to show their differences, instigate conflict between them, and have them develop independent relationships in and out of the main cast. But for that, you'll have to wait to see exactly what I have planned. The last few relationships I wanted to go over all center around Manny. Lada aside, no one in the cast has spent an extensive amount of time around dogs. And especially considering how large Manny is, she inspires a lot of trepidation, to put it mildly, when the cats first meet her. She doesn't bark as often as many dog breeds would, but when she does, her barks, steps, and even breaths are much louder than those of a cat. She's much more used to feats of strength and endurance than the cats are, including hiking, swimming, and some level of protection. But she isn't nearly as agile or careful as they are, making many of the attempts to teach her things like hunting or sneaking around difficult at best. Foxtail and Prevette in particular really only tolerate Manny's presence at the start of the story because a big, strong, protective unit like her could probably intimidate other cats away. But they don't think of Manny as her own being, beyond being Lada's strange tag-along. Manny, meanwhile, doesn't conceptualize of many of them beyond being orange cat, red cat, gray cat, and so on. She has no issues with them, but definitely doesn't feel as close to or protective of them as she does of Lada. However, over the course of this and the next books, that will start to change. In just this first book, Spring and Manny will have a chance to bond after noticing their mutual care for Lada, and Elm and Manny will get to develop more of a connection since Elm's power will help them and the group communicate with Manny more directly than anyone else would be capable of. I know at this point exactly how close Manny is going to be to many of these cats, which will be especially important for putting pressure on Lada. Hey, I'm still an author. I need to torture my characters sometimes. It provides opportunities for character growth and exploration. All of these characters have many more relationships and changes to these relationships, but I think this is where I'm going to stop for now to avoid spoiling too much of the final story. After the first book is released, I'm thinking of doing a more granular analysis of how I worked in, and how you could work in, this type of characterization and relationship building into the dialogue and narration of day-to-day scenes and story structure. But that's something I'd like to save until the book is available for you to follow along with yourself. For now, I hope you enjoyed this little peek into the dynamics this collection of kitty characters and their dogged companion will possess. I cannot wait until I get to share the full story with you, so you can finally experience these characters for yourself. Thank you for watching, and always remember that showing us how your characters interact is the best way to show us who they are.